slap landed before Joanna even understood what her own hand had done. Mike froze, blood blooming on his lip, his eyes wide with the kind of shock only a man who had never been answered back could wear. The whole apartment held its breath. And then, in the silence that followed, Joanna looked at the husband who had just hit her, smiled with something colder than rage, and said with all seriousness, "If you ever raise your hand at me again, be prepared for mine too." Mike stood frozen and still shocked from the slap. It shocked him that his dear wife had grown wings. Welcome to Afrohan Tales Besties. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories like this. The cramped apartment in Lagos still smelled of the burnt rice Joanna had been cooking when the argument started. Pot hissed on the stove. Outside the thin walls, a generator coughed and a child cried somewhere down the hallway. Mike touched his lip, looked at the smear of red on his fingers, and his face twisted into something Joanna had never seen before. "You hit me," he whispered. Then louder. "You hit me. You hit me first. I'm your husband. And I am your wife." Was. Mike paced the small living room like a caged dog, knocking over a plastic chair, sweeping a mug off the table so it shattered against the wall. Joanna didn't flinch. She had flinched for 2 years. She had flinched the first time he called her stupid in front of his friends. She had flinched the night he twisted her wrist for serving his food cold. She had flinched every time his voice got too low and too quiet. She was done flinching. "You think you're a man now?" Mike spat, yanking open the drawer beneath the television. "You think because you can talk back, you're a man? Let me show you what a real woman looks like." He pulled out a manila envelope. Joanna already knew what was inside. He had been waving those papers in her face for months. Every time she disagreed, every time she dared to want anything for herself. This time he didn't wave them. He threw them at her chest. "Sign it. Sign it and get out of my house." Joanna caught the envelope before it hit the floor. She looked down at the printed words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage," and for 1 second, just one, her hand trembled. Then she walked to the kitchen, picked up a pen from the jar by the kettle, and signed her name. She didn't cry. That was what scared him. Later that night, the neighbors came to their windows to watch. Mike dragged Joanna's suitcase down the narrow corridor and threw it onto the dusty street, the wheels skidding in the red dirt. Her clothes spilled. A pair of yellow slippers she had bought with her first salary as a shop attendant tumbled into the gutter. Mike stood in the doorway, shirtless, sweating, triumphant. "Look at her," he announced to no one and everyone. "Look at the woman who thinks she can hit her husband. The world will humble you, Joanna. No man will ever keep a woman like you. You hear me? Nobody." Mama Chinidu, who sold akara from a wooden stall across the road, pressed a hand to her mouth. The Okada riders by the junction stopped, pretending not to listen. A girl no older than 10 peered from behind her mother's wrapper. Joanna did not look at any of them. She knelt in the dirt, picked up her clothes one by one, folded them on top of the cracked suitcase, and zipped it shut. She picked up the slippers, knocked the dust off them, and slid them onto her feet. Then she stood up, rolled her shoulders back, and walked. She did not look back. She did not cry. Mike kept shouting at her shrinking shape, about her ungratefulness, about her arrogance, about how she would come crawling back within a month, until his voice gave out and the night swallowed her. Now, besties, before we go any further, I have to ask you, have you ever been in an abusive marriage? Have you ever stood up and refused to be humiliated? Have you ever been the woman everyone told to endure, to bend her head, to swallow her pride, to take it for the sake of the home? Drop your story in the comments below. Tell me where you are right now. Tell me if you stayed, if you left, if you're still finding the courage. Your story matters here. And if Joanna's hand reminded you of the strength inside your own, hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, what she does next will shake you. The next day, the news had already traveled. It traveled the way news always traveled, in places where everybody knew everybody's business. By the time Joanna arrived at her family house in the older part of town, 3 women had already called her mother. By the time she sat down at the dining table, her Aunt Chioma was already there, arms folded, lips pursed. "Joanna!" Aunt Chioma did not greet her. What is this nonsense I am hearing? Joanna set her suitcase by the wall. Good evening, Auntie. Good evening, my foot. Is it true you slapped your husband? He slapped me first. And so, Joanna's mother, a small woman with tired eyes named Mrs. Adiz Okeke, set down a plate of jollof rice in front of her daughter. She did not speak. She had learned long ago that in this house, between her sister and her daughter, her voice did not carry. And so, Aunt Chioma repeated louder. A man raises his hand, you bend your head. That is how marriage works. That is how my marriage worked. That is how every marriage in this family has worked for 5 generations. Who taught you to be different? Nobody taught me, Joanna said quietly. I just woke up. You woke up to disgrace yourself in front of the whole compound. I woke up to stop dying. Aunt Chioma slammed her hand on the table. The plate of jollof jumped. Don't be dramatic. Mike is a good man. He has a job. He has a house. He doesn't drink. Do you know how many women would kill to have what you had? Then let them have it, Joanna said. I am done. She picked up her fork and began to eat. A few days later, Joanna learned that Mike was already moving on. Her cousin Afani was the one who told her. He came to the house with his phone in his hand and an expression that could not decide whether to be pitying or amused. He sat on the worn brown couch where Joanna had been folding laundry and turned the screen toward her without speaking. It was a photograph. Mike, at a club in Lekki, his arm around a woman in a tight red dress, a glass of champagne in his other hand, his teeth showing in a grin Joanna had not seen on his face in 3 years. The caption read, New Beginnings. God is good. Joanna stared at the photo for a long moment. She did not cry. She set down the laundry, reached for Afani's phone, and zoomed in. Not on Mike. On the woman. She studied the woman's face, the desperate brightness of her smile, the way her shoulders were turned inward like she was already trying to make herself smaller. What are you looking at? Afani asked. A girl who doesn't know yet. Doesn't know what? Joanna handed back the phone. Doesn't know what's coming. She went back to folding the laundry. Mike's mother had already called twice that morning to scream at her. The market women had already started saying she had used juju on her husband to make him send her away. A girl from her old secondary school had posted a long Facebook caption about how some women just don't know how to keep a home. Joanna folded a faded t-shirt into a perfect square. She did not cry. That evening, the line broke. Joanna had gone out behind the house to bring in the clothes from the line before the rain came. The compound was quiet, the air thick with the wet earth smell of an approaching storm. She was reaching for a wrapper when she heard her aunt's voice through the open kitchen window, talking on the phone, not bothering to keep it down. My sister's daughter? Hopeless. Hopeless, I tell you. Even her own husband could not manage her. No man wants a woman he cannot control. She will sit in this house and grow old. Mark my words. Who will marry a divorced woman of 28 with a sharp mouth? The words hit harder than Mike's slap. Joanna stood very still beside the clothesline, a wet wrapper hanging from her hand, the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall on her shoulders. Something inside her, something that had been holding on by a fraying thread, finally snapped clean. She did not cry then either. She walked back into the house, water dripping from the wrapper onto the linoleum, and went straight to her mother's bedroom. Her mother was sitting on the edge of the bed, peeling the foil from a strip of malaria tablets. Mama. My daughter. I'm leaving. Her mother's hands paused on the foil. Leaving where? The country. I'm leaving Nigeria. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the rain began in earnest, drumming on the zinc roof. Mrs. Okeke set down the tablets. She looked at her daughter for a long time, at the firmness of her jaw, at the steadiness of her eyes, at the way she stood like a woman who had already made a decision and was only being polite by announcing it. Where? Her mother finally asked. South Korea. Seoul. I have a friend from secondary school who works there. She says they hire English speakers. She says I can stay with her until I find my feet. Joanna, that's the other side of the world. I know. You don't speak the language. I'll learn. You don't know anyone. I'll learn that too. Mrs. Okeke closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, but Joanna's were not. Your aunt will say you're running away. Let her. The community will laugh. They're already laughing. Her mother reached out and took her daughter's hand. Wet from the rain, calloused from years of cooking and cleaning and surviving, and held it in her own small one. Then go, she whispered. Go, my daughter, and don't come back the way you left. 3 weeks later, Joanna boarded a plane for the first time in her life. The relatives gathered at the airport, ostensibly to see her off, actually to witness what they were sure would be the beginning of her humiliation. Aunt Chioma kept clucking her tongue and saying things like, "At least Korea has good hospitals. You'll need them when you crawl back." 2 of her cousins recorded videos for their status updates. Mike did not come. Mike had sent a text instead. The text read, "You'll be back in 6 months. Mark my words." Joanna deleted the text without replying. At the gate, her mother held her face in both hands and pressed a folded $100 bill into her palm. "It's not much. It's everything. Promise me one thing, Joanna. Anything. Don't ever again let any man, make you smaller than you are. You hear me? Never again." Joanna nodded. Her throat was tight, but her eyes stayed dry. "Never again, Mama." She walked through the gate without looking back. The relatives waved. Aunt Chioma muttered something about pride. Joanna's mother stood at the glass and watched her only daughter disappear into the long white tunnel that led to the plane. And she finally did what Joanna had refused to do for 3 weeks. She wept. The following morning, Seoul was cold in a way Joanna had never imagined. It was not the cold of a Lagos harmattan. It was a cold that bit through her thin jacket and into her bones, that made her breath show in white puffs, that made the tip of her nose go numb within 5 minutes of stepping out of Incheon Airport. She stood on the curb with 2 suitcases and a piece of paper with an address written on it. And for the first time since she had signed those divorce papers, her hand trembled. A woman bumped into her without apologizing. A man stared at her hair. A child pointed and said something in Korean that made his mother yank his arm and walk faster. Joanna adjusted her grip on her suitcase, lifted her chin, and walked toward the taxi line. Her friend Ada lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in a noisy district called Itaewon. 3 flights up a narrow staircase that smelled like garlic and fried fish. Ada had aged 10 years since secondary school. She worked 2 jobs, one at a hair salon for African women, one at a late-night convenience store, and she greeted Joanna with a tight hug and a warning. "This place will eat you, Jo. It will eat you slowly if you let it." "I won't let it. They will look at you like you don't belong. They will charge you more for everything. They will assume you are loud or a prostitute or a thief or all 3. I know. Some of them are kind. Most of them are not unkind, just indifferent. Indifference is its own kind of cruelty when you're alone." Joanna set down her suitcases and looked around the apartment, at the single mattress on the floor, at the rice cooker on a stool, at the small window that showed nothing but the back of another building. "It's perfect," she said. Ada laughed for the first time. "You haven't even seen the bathroom. I've slept in worse places." "Have you?" "I've slept beside Mike." Ada stopped laughing. She came across the small room and pulled Joanna into a hug that lasted a long time, and only then, finally, did Joanna feel her eyes prick. She did not let the tears fall. But it was close. A few weeks later, Joanna had her first job. It was at a kimchi factory 2 trains and a bus away. She worked from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then took a second shift at a Nigerian restaurant in Itaewon from 4 until midnight. Her hands cracked and bled from the cold and the brine. Her back ached from standing. Her Korean grew, word by stubborn word. Annyeonghaseyo, Gamsahamnida, Juzio, Yelmiyo, words she practiced under her breath on the long subway rides home. Men leered. Women whispered. A drunk salaryman on the train once reached out to touch her hair, and she caught his wrist midair and twisted it backward until he yelped, and the whole car went silent and pretended not to see. She learned that silence here was not the same as the silence in Lagos. In Lagos, silence had been a wall. In Seoul, silence was a curtain, pulled just enough to hide what people preferred not to deal with. She learned to live behind that curtain. She learned to be alone. She learned not to look at men, not to smile at them, not to give them the smallest opening. 2 years of marriage to Mike had taught her what an opening cost. By the end of the first month, she had not made a single male friend. She had not wanted to. That evening, the evening everything began to change. Joanna stopped at a small bar 2 blocks from the restaurant because the rain was coming down hard and she had no umbrella. The bar was warm and noisy and crowded with after-work salarymen. The air thick with soju and grilled meat. Joanna found a single empty seat at the counter, ordered a bowl of kalguksu noodles in halting Korean, and bent her head over her food. She did not look up. She did not want to be seen. She wanted only the warmth of the broth and the noise of strangers and the rain to stop. She had almost finished her bowl when she heard the crash. A glass had hit the floor. Then a woman's voice. Hi, frightened, apologizing in rapid Korean. Then a man's voice, drunk, ugly, rising. Joanna looked up. An elderly woman, maybe 70, was standing beside an overturned chair with her hands raised in apology. A younger woman, probably the bar's waitress, knelt at her feet with a cloth, picking up shards of glass. 3 men in cheap suits were on their feet around her. The biggest one, red-faced, sweating, was shouting and jabbing his finger into the old woman's shoulder, hard enough that she stumbled with each jab. His friends were laughing. The bar went quiet. 40 people watched. 40 people ate. Nobody moved. Joanna looked at the old woman's face. The old woman was trying to bow over and over, her white hair falling out of its pins, her trembling hands clutching her purse to her chest. For the briefest of moments, in the shape of those trembling hands, Joanna saw her own mother. She set down her chopsticks. She stood up. What happened next would later be replayed across every messaging app in Itaewon, then across all of Seoul, and eventually across screens in cities Joanna had never heard of. Joanna walked across the bar, stepped between the elderly woman and the drunken man, and said, in calm, broken Korean, "Stop!" The drunk laughed. He looked her up and down, her dark skin, her tired work clothes, her braided hair, and said something to his friends that made them laugh harder. Then he reached past her toward the old woman. He never touched her. Joanna caught his wrist mid-air, twisted it the way she had twisted the salaryman's on the train, and stepped sideways so that his own momentum slammed him chest first into the counter. The drunk howled. His 2 friends came at her. Joanna ducked under the first punch, drove her elbow into the second man's stomach, and when he doubled over she brought her knee up into his nose. The third man, smarter, sober enough to be careful, pulled a beer bottle off the counter and broke it in half against the wood. Joanna picked up a chair. It was over in less than 90 seconds. The drunk was on his knees holding his wrist. The second man was curled on the floor, blood on his shirt. The third man had backed away with his hands up, his half-bottle abandoned on a table, muttering something about not wanting trouble. Joanna set the chair down. Her chest was heaving. Her hand was bleeding where a piece of glass had cut her palm. She turned to the elderly woman, who was still standing frozen with her hands at her chest, and bowed, properly, deeply, the way Ada had taught her. "Are you all right, Halmoni?" The old woman began to cry. Joanna helped her into a chair. She asked the waitress for a glass of water. She wiped her own bleeding hand on a napkin. She did not look around. She did not see the way the entire bar was staring at her. She did not see the man in the elevated VIP section at the back. But the man in the VIP section saw her. His name was Kang Junwoo, and he had not been surprised by anything in 11 years. He sat in a half-shadowed booth above the main floor with 2 of his lieutenants and an untouched glass of whiskey on the table in front of him. He had been listening to a report about a port shipment. He had stopped listening the moment the glass broke downstairs. The lieutenant on his left, a thick-shouldered man named Min Jae, followed his gaze and frowned. "Boss, should we send someone down?" Junwoo did not answer. He was watching the woman. He watched her stand up from her seat. He watched her walk across the floor with the unhurried steadiness of someone who had already decided what she was going to do. He watched her say one Korean word, "Stop," and he watched the drunk laugh at her. He watched her break the drunk's wrist in a single, clean motion, the kind of motion you didn't learn from a self-defense class, the kind you learned from years of needing it. He watched her drop the second man with an elbow he himself had taught his enforcers to use. He watched her pick up a chair as if she had never doubted, even for a second, that she would win. And when it was over, he watched her bow to an old woman she did not know. Min-jae cleared his throat. "Boss."
Yunwoo finally spoke.
His voice was very quiet. "Who is she?" "I don't know, sir. She's not from any organization. Find out." "Yes, sir." Quietly. "Yes, sir." Junwoo lifted the whiskey glass for the first time and drank. His face, which his enemies and his men and even his own brother had described as a closed door, did something it had not done in 11 years. It opened just a crack, and something he had locked away for a very long time looked out through the gap. The next day, Joanna went back to work as if nothing had happened. She did not know that the bar's owner had refused her payment for the noodles. She did not know that the elderly woman she had defended was the mother of a powerful district councilman who would, within 48 hours, send her a hand-delivered letter of thanks and a small white envelope with money inside. She did not know that 2 streets away, in a tower of black glass, 3 men in expensive suits were watching grainy security footage of her on a large screen and arguing in low voices about who she might be. She knew only that her hands still hurt from the glass cut, that her shift at the kimchi factory started in 20 minutes, and that she was running late. She did not know she was being watched. She did not know it would not stop. A few days later, small things began to happen. The Korean grandmother who ran the corner shop near her apartment refused to take her money for milk. "Already paid," the old woman said in halting English, beaming at Joanna. "Nice gentleman. Already paid for your milk. Also your bread. Also your eggs." The bus driver on her morning route began nodding to her and waving her past the card reader. The kimchi factory floor manager, a sour man who had docked her pay twice for taking water breaks, was suddenly polite. Suddenly very polite. He apologized for the smell, for the cold, for the long hours. He offered her gloves. He offered her a chair during her lunch break. When she walked home one evening, she noticed a black car parked across the street from her building. The next evening, it was there again. The third evening, she stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turned to face the car directly, and stared at it with her hands on her hips. The car drove away, came back the next night. By the end of that week, she met him. It was a Friday. She had finished her shift at the restaurant, her clothes smelling of palm oil and pepper, and she had stopped at the same bar. The bar she had now begun to think of with mild irritation as the bar, because the rain had again caught her without an umbrella. She did not see him at first. She ordered her noodles. She bent her head. She ate. Then a shadow fell across her bowl, and a deep, unhurried voice said, in slightly accented English, "May I sit?" Joanna looked up. The man standing beside her was tall in the way that suggested he had to think about doorways. His suit was black and so well cut it looked like it had been built around him rather than sewn. His hair was black, slightly long, falling over a brow that was too sharp for the rest of his face. His eyes were the color of strong tea, set deep, calm, watching her with the expression of a man who had asked a question and was prepared to wait however long she needed to answer. She knew in an instant that he was dangerous. She also knew in an instant that he was the man who had been paying for her milk. She put her chopsticks down very slowly. "No," she said. He did not move. He did not look surprised. He did not look offended. "May I know your name?"
"No."
"Will you let me apologize for the men who hurt you that night?" "They didn't hurt me. They tried. Trying is not hurting." A slight smile touched the corner of his mouth. "May I at least know what to call you?" "Whatever you want," Joanna said. "It doesn't matter. I won't be sitting with you. I won't be talking with you. And I won't be needing a man to pay for my milk." The smile deepened, just a fraction. He inclined his head, not a bow, but the cousin of one, and stepped back from the counter. "Then forgive the intrusion." He paused. "Madam." He turned and walked away. Joanna stared at her noodles. Her heart was beating hard in a way she did not like and could not explain. She told herself it was anger. She told herself it was the cold. She told herself it was the fact that the man had clearly been paying for her groceries for a week, which was the kind of thing only a controlling man did, and she was done with controlling men forever and ever, amen. She told herself a lot of things. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that, for the first time since she had landed in Seoul, she had looked a man in the eyes and not wanted to look away. The following morning, the milk was paid for again. Joanna stood at the counter of the corner shop holding a carton of milk and a wad of crumpled one, and she felt a slow heat climb up the back of her neck. "Tell him to stop," she said to the old shopkeeper. The shopkeeper smiled blandly. "Tell who, dear?" "He knows who." "I don't know what you mean." Joanna set the milk down a little harder than she meant to. She walked out of the shop, walked 3 blocks in the wrong direction, and bought her milk from a different store. She paid full price. She felt better. She felt worse. That evening, when she came home, there was a small box outside her apartment door. Inside the box was a pair of gloves, soft, lined with something that looked like real fur, the right size for her hands. There was no card. There was no note. She stared at the gloves for a long minute. Then she put them on because her hands had been cracking for weeks, and because pride was one thing but frostbite was another. She told herself she would give them back the moment she saw him again. She did not give them back. A few days later, Joanna stopped pretending he wasn't there. He was always there now, in some small way. The black car at the curb in the evening. A driver waiting outside the kimchi factory at 2 a.m. with a folded note that said for safety, no obligation. A bouquet of plain white flowers, not roses, not anything showy, just wildflowers like the ones that grew along the roads outside Lagos. Left at her door on a Sunday morning. He never came inside. He never followed her into the bar again. He never crossed the line she had drawn. He simply waited on the other side of it. She had not known until then that a man could wait. The first time she spoke to him without trying to drive him away, it was a Tuesday night, and she had just been fired from the kimchi factory. The floor manager had finally found a reason. A bag of cabbages had gone missing from her station. She had not taken it. She knew who had. The Vietnamese girl 2 stations over had been crying about her sick brother all week. Joanna had not said a word. She had simply taken her last paycheck, walked out into the freezing dawn, and stood on the corner trying to decide whether to walk to the second job or to lie down in the snow and finally cry. The black car pulled up beside her. The driver got out, opened the back door, and stood quietly waiting. In the back seat sat Junwoo, his elbow resting on the window frame, a thermos in his hand. He didn't say anything. He simply held out the thermos. She looked at it for a long moment. Steam curled from the lid. She could smell ginger. She could smell honey. "It's hot," he said simply. "It's a long walk." She got in the car. She didn't know why she got in the car. She didn't entirely understand it for a long time afterward. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the tiredness. Maybe it was the way he didn't ask her where she was going, or what had happened, or why her eyes were red. He simply handed her the thermos and looked out the window and let her drink it in silence. Halfway across the city, she finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" Junwoo did not turn his head. "Doing what?" "All of it. The milk, the gloves, the car." "Why?" For a long moment he did not answer. The car slid through the white morning, between the tall black buildings of a country she did not understand, and she thought he was not going to answer at all. Then he said very quietly, "Because I have spent a long time around men who break things, and I have never, in my life, watched anyone refuse to be broken the way you did." Joanna looked down at the thermos in her hands. She did not cry then either, but for the first time in 2 years she wanted to. If you're feeling Joanna's story, besties, this is the part where the slow burn starts to catch. Do me a favor. Drop a comment telling me what you would have said to Mike on that dusty Lego street. Hit that like button if you're rooting for our girl. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Junwoo's enemies finally find out what she means to him. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Over the next several weeks, Joanna and Junwoo built something Joanna did not have a word for. It was not friendship. Friends did not send black cars. Friends did not have lieutenants. Friends did not move through a city like Junwoo moved through Seoul. Quietly, attentively, with everyone in every restaurant and shop and lobby tightening their shoulders the moment he walked in. It was not romance. Romance, in Joanna's experience, was Mike telling her she looked beautiful at their engagement party and slapping her 3 months later for wearing the same dress to a wedding without asking permission. What Junwoo offered, Joanna slowly came to understand, was something else. It was attention, the unhurried, absolute, undivided attention of a man who had decided that her existence mattered. He took her, on her first day off, to a small tea house tucked behind a temple. He poured her tea before pouring his own. He asked her questions about her childhood, what her mother's cooking had smelled like, what songs the bus drivers had played in Lagos traffic, what she had wanted to be when she was 12. He listened with his entire body. When she made a joke, he did not laugh, but his eyes warmed in a way that was almost worse, because she found herself making more jokes just to see it happen. He took her, the next week, to a bookshop she had walked past 100 times without going in. The owner greeted Junwoo with a bow so deep his forehead nearly touched his knees. Junwoo handed Joanna a small leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen and said simply, "For when you decide what you want to do next." He did not ask what that was. He did not push. He did not assume. He simply waited. That evening, on the way home, she finally asked, "What do you do, Junwoo?" He had been driving himself that night, a rare thing she would later learn. The streetlights slid across his face in slow yellow strokes. He did not answer immediately. "I run a family business." "What kind of family business?" "The complicated kind." She turned in her seat to look at him fully. "Are you a criminal?" For a long moment he was silent. Then he said, with no apology and no theater, "Yes." Joanna breathed out slowly. "Do you hurt women?"
No.
"Do you hurt men who hurt women?" A pause. Then, very quietly, "Sometimes." "Do you lie to me?"
No, Joanna.
"I will not lie to you. Not now. Not ever. If there is a thing I cannot tell you, I will tell you that I cannot tell you. But I will not lie." She turned and looked out the window. The city was very large and very strange and very cold. Somewhere in it, 3,000 miles from home, she had found the only man who had ever told her the truth on the first ask. "Take me home," she said. He took her home. He did not ask to come up. He never asked to come up. A few nights later, after a long shift at the restaurant, Joanna finally told him about Mike. They were sitting on a low bench overlooking the Han River. The city lights smeared across the black water, a paper bag of street food between them. Joanna told him everything. The slapback, the divorce papers, the luggage on the dusty street, the ant in the kitchen, the jollof rice that had gone cold while she signed away 2 years of her life, the plane, the cold, the kimchi, the night in the bar.
Junwoo listened without interrupting.
When she was done, the silence stretched for a long time. Then he said very softly, "A woman fighting back does not threaten a real man." Joanna turned her head and looked at him. "What did you say?" "A woman fighting back," he repeated, "does not threaten a real man. It only threatens the ones who were never men to begin with." Something inside Joanna, which had been frozen for 2 years and 3,000 miles and one ocean, cracked. She did not cry, but she did something she had not done since the day Mike had thrown her luggage onto the dust. She reached out, in the cold black air over the Han River, and she took Junwoo's hand. He did not move. He did not breathe. For a moment. Then, very slowly, he closed his fingers around hers. Carefully, the way a man closes his hand around a bird, and he held on. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. What Joanna did not know, as she sat on that bench with her hand in Junwoo's, was that 2 streets away, a black SUV was parked at an angle that gave its passengers a clear view of the railing. Inside the SUV, 3 men were arguing. One of them was on the phone with somebody important. Another was zooming a long camera lens across the river. The third was watching Junwoo's hand on Joanna's hand with an expression of slow, calculating interest. "She's the one?" the third man asked. "She's the one. Are you sure?" "He's never held anyone's hand. Not in 11 years. The third man smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Then we have him," he said. "Finally, after all this time, we have him." He lifted his phone. He began to dial. The phone rang only once before it was answered. The man in the SUV did not waste words. "We found his weakness. Yes. A woman. African. Lives in Itaewon, works 2 jobs, no family in country. No protection of her own. He's been watching her for weeks. Tonight he held her hand." A pause as the voice on the other end said something. "No, sir. Not yet. We watch first. We learn her. We find someone she will trust." Another pause. "Yes, sir. I think I know exactly who." The man lowered the phone. He turned to the others in the SUV. Pull her file. Everything. Family. School. Marriage records. I want to know who she loved before him, who she trusted, who she ran from. There is always somebody who can be bought. The SUV pulled away from the curb. By the river, Junwoo and Joanna were still sitting in the cold, still holding hands, still unaware. The next morning, 3,000 miles away, Mike Adeyemi's life was already in pieces. He sat on the edge of an unmade bed in a one-bedroom flat in Surulere. Not the apartment he and Joanna had shared. That one had been repossessed 2 months ago when he could not pay the rent, and stared at his phone. The girl in the red dress from the Lecky Club had stopped answering his calls 3 weeks ago. The girl after her had lasted 9 days. The girl after that had taken one look at the way he spoke to a waiter and walked out before the food arrived. His business, a small import-export thing that had survived only because Joanna had quietly kept the books, had collapsed within 4 months of her leaving. His mother had stopped calling. His friends had stopped picking up. The same men who had laughed with him on that dusty Lego street the night he threw out his wife now crossed the road when they saw him coming. And on his phone screen, glowing in the dim morning light, was an Instagram post. It was Joanna. She was wearing a coat he could not afford to buy his own mother. She was stepping out of a black car with tinted windows. A man's hand, pale, ringed in something heavy and gold, was at the small of her back. The caption on the gossip page read, "Mystery African beauty scene with reclusive soul air at art gala. Who is she?" Mike scrolled. There were more photos. Joanna laughing at a restaurant. Joanna on a balcony with the lights of an unfamiliar city behind her. Joanna wearing earrings that, even through a phone screen, looked like they cost more than the apartment he had thrown her out of. His hand began to shake. He had told her the world would humble her. He had told her no man would ever keep a woman like her. He had told her she would come crawling back. And here she was, in another man's coat, in another man's car, on another continent, looking like a woman who had never crawled for anything in her life. The phone buzzed in his hand. An unknown number, a Korean country code. He almost did not answer. He answered. A few days later, Mike was on a plane. The voice on the phone had introduced itself only as a friend who knew about his situation. The voice had spoken English with a faint, careful accent. The voice had said certain things, about Joanna, about the man she was with, about the danger she might be in. That twisted something already ugly inside Mike into something worse. She is being used, the voice had said. He is a dangerous man. Eventually, he will tire of her. Eventually, she will be hurt or worse. We are people who would prefer that she come home before that happens. We are willing to make it worth your time to help us. Mike had asked how much. The voice had named a figure that made his ears ring. And what would I have to do? Mike had asked. Talk to her, the voice had said. Just talk to her. Like a man who is sorry. Like a man who has changed. Mike had laughed bitterly into the phone. She'll never believe me. You would be surprised, the voice had said. How much a woman wants to believe the man she once loved. The plane ticket had arrived at his door within 24 hours. Business class. He had never flown business class in his life. He sat in the wide seat with a glass of champagne he had not asked for and told himself over and over that he was doing this for her. He was doing this to save her. He almost believed it. That evening in Seoul, Joanna was helping Junwoo's mother arrange flowers. It had been nearly 4 months since the night by the Han River, and Joanna's life had quietly, profoundly reshaped itself. She had quit the kimchi factory and the restaurant. Junwoo had not asked her to. She had simply realized one morning that she did not need them anymore. Not because he had taken care of her, but because he had given her time and a small leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen, and in the time and on the pages she had built the bones of a small consulting business that taught Korean companies how to do business with Nigerian and Ghanaian markets. 3 contracts in the first month. 7 by the end of the second. By the 4th month, she had her own office, small, hers, paid for with her own money, 3 subway stops from his. He had not bought it for her. He had not offered to buy it for her. He had asked once if she needed help, and when she said no, he had said good and never asked again. Tonight, however, he had asked her for something. He had asked her to come and meet his mother. Mrs. Kong was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who did not smile often. She had received Joanna with the expressionless courtesy of a woman who had buried a husband, raised 3 sons, and learned long ago not to invest emotion in things that could be taken from her. She had walked Joanna through the house, shown her the family altar, handed her a pair of pruning shears and said in careful English, "We will arrange the flowers together, then we will have tea, then we will see." They arranged the flowers. Mrs. Kong did not speak for a long time. Then, without looking up from a stem of white chrysanthemum, she said, "My son does not love easily. I know. He has never brought a woman to this house. I know that too. He tells me you were married before." "Yes." "He tells me your husband was a small man." Joanna paused with the shears. "He was. And what do you think of my son, Joanna? Now that you are no longer married to a small man." Joanna set down the shears. She looked at the elderly woman across the table, at the careful hands, at the lined face, at the eyes that were the same shape as Junwoo's, only without the lock he kept on his. "I think your son is the first man," Joanna said slowly, "who ever looked at the parts of me my husband called wrong and called them right." Mrs. Kong considered this for a long moment. Then, for the first time since Joanna had arrived, she smiled. "Welcome to my house," she said simply, and went back to the chrysanthemums. Later that night, Junwoo drove her home himself. He did not drive her to her apartment. He drove her, by silent mutual agreement that had been silently and mutually agreed upon weeks ago, to his. His apartment was on the top floor of a tower that looked over the river. It was sparse and beautiful and smelled, faintly, of cedar and something more masculine that Joanna had never been able to name. There was a balcony with 2 chairs. There was a kitchen she had begun to leave her own coffee mug in. There was a wardrobe where, 3 weeks ago, she had hung up a single dress, and he had not moved it, and she had not taken it back. They stood on the balcony, the night cold around them, his coat around her shoulders, and Junwoo finally asked the question he had been carrying for weeks. "Joanna, are you afraid of me?" She turned to look at him. The wind moved his hair. The lights of the city behind him made him look like something carved out of shadow. "No," she said. "I am afraid of what I feel for you. That is not the same." He was very still. "Tell me," he said, "what you feel for me." She did not answer right away. She watched the river. She watched a ferry crawl across the black water. She watched a single white bird wheel very high against the light pollution. Then she turned, took his face in both of her hands. The hands that had slapped her husband, that had broken a drunk's wrist, that had folded laundry in a Lagos compound while the world laughed at her. And she said, very quietly, "I feel like a woman who has been afraid of being a woman for a very long time, and like she is not afraid anymore." The kiss, when it finally came, was not the kiss of a man taking something. It was the kiss of a man who had been waiting 11 years for one specific woman to decide that she would let him stay. The balcony door closed behind them. The lights inside dimmed. The night took the rest. The following morning, Joanna woke up in his bed with his arm around her waist, and for the first 30 seconds of consciousness, she was sure she had made a terrible mistake. She lay very still. She listened to him breathe. She listened to the city wake up beyond the windows. She thought about every man who had ever told her that what just happened the night before had given him the right to a piece of her she had not handed over. She thought about Mike. She thought about the slap. She thought about the dust. She thought about the long white tunnel at the airport. She told herself she would leave before he woke up. She would not let him be the one to send her away. She slipped out from under his arm. She got dressed in the bathroom in the dark. She wrote nothing. She left nothing. She walked to the door and put her hand on the handle and breathed out shakily and pulled. She was halfway to the elevator when the apartment door opened behind her. Junwoo stood in the doorway, barefoot, his hair tangled, a robe pulled hastily around him. His eyes still soft with sleep but already wide awake. Not angry, not hurt, but absolutely immovably present. "Joanna!" She stopped. "Don't run." "I'm not running." "Yes, you are." He stepped into the corridor. He did not come closer. "I will not chase you, Joanna, if you don't want to be chased. But I will stand here in this hallway in my robe in front of all of my neighbors, and I will tell you that I am not Mike. I am not the men in the bar. I am not the aunt in the kitchen. I am the man who has been waiting for you on the other side of every line you have drawn for 4 months. I will keep waiting, but I will not let you walk out of my home pretending last night was a mistake. It was not a mistake. It was the first thing I have done in 11 years that was not. Joanna stood at the elevator. Her hand was still on the call button. Her chest hurt. She let go of the button. She walked back down the corridor, past him, into the apartment. She turned in the middle of the living room and waited until he had closed the door behind them. Then she walked into his arms and finally, after 2 years and 3,000 miles and 1 ocean and 11 years of his locked heart and 1 dusty Lego street, she cried. She cried for a long time. He held her the entire time. He did not say a word. 3 days later, Mike landed at Incheon. He passed through customs with the address of a hotel he had not booked, a phone with a Korean SIM card that had been activated remotely while he was in the air, and a number to call when he was in his room. He called the number. The voice told him to rest. The voice told him not to leave the hotel until he was contacted. The voice told him, almost as an afterthought, that there was a small leather case in the closet of his suite. He should look at what was inside. Mike opened the closet. He stared at the contents of the case for a very long time. Then he closed the case, sat down on the edge of the enormous bed, and discovered that his hands were shaking again. He told himself it was the jet lag. It was not the jet lag. The next afternoon, Joanna received the message. It came to her business email, the one printed on the cards she handed out at meetings. The sender was Mike. The subject line read, "I'm in Seoul. Please, just talk to me. 1 conversation." She read it 3 times. She closed her laptop. She walked across her small office to the window and stood there with her arms crossed and her jaw set and watched the cars go by below. That evening, she told Junwoo over dinner. He set down his chopsticks very carefully. "He is here. Apparently. In Seoul." "Yes." A long silence. "I do not like this, Joanna." "I don't either. The timing is wrong." She looked up. "What do you mean, the timing is wrong?" Junwoo did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was the voice he used in business meetings. Flat, careful, every syllable measured. "For a long time, my organization has been at peace with a rival we used to be at war with. 2 weeks ago, that peace ended. There has been movement at the docks. Movement in the financial papers. Movement on the streets. 3 of my men have been threatened. 1 was followed home. I have been waiting for them to make a real move. And now your husband, your ex-husband, appears in the city. 3 days after you came to my home for the first time. 3 days, Joanna. That is not coincidence." Joanna set down her own chopsticks. "You think they brought him here? I think it is possible." "To do what?" He met her eyes. "To get close to you." She breathed out. "Then I will not let him get close." "Joanna!" "No," she reached across the table and took his hand. "Listen to me. I will meet him. Once. In a public place with your people in the room. I will let him say his piece. I will tell him to go home. And I will come back to you the same night. If he is being used, I want him to know that I know. If he is not, I want him to leave Seoul knowing he wasted the trip. It is dangerous. He is dangerous to my history, Junwoo. He is not dangerous to me anymore. I am not the woman he threw out of that apartment." Junwoo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I will have 4 men in that restaurant. He will not see them. They will not interfere unless I tell them to. And I will be in a car outside. Every minute. The entire time." She nodded. "Agreed." "And Joanna?" "Yes. If at any point you feel that something is wrong, you say 1 word. Any word. Anything you would not normally say. And the 4 men in the restaurant will end the meeting for you in the time it takes you to stand up." She squeezed his hand. "What word?" He thought about it. "Lagos," he said quietly. "If you say Lagos, I will know." She nodded. "Lagos," she repeated. The next afternoon, she met Mike in a quiet Korean restaurant near Gangnam Station. He was already seated when she walked in. He had aged. That was the first thing she noticed. His face was thinner. His hair had begun to recede at the temples. The expensive jacket he was wearing did not quite fit him, as if he had borrowed it or, more accurately, been given it. He stood up when he saw her, and for one painful, embarrassing second he tried to embrace her, and she stepped back smoothly and sat down across the table without a word. He sat back down. He cleared his throat. Joanna. Mike. You look well. I am well. You look different. I am different. He smiled. It was the same smile from the Lecky Club photo. It did not reach his eyes. Joanna, listen. I have come a long way. I have spent a lot of money. I have come to apologize. I have come to. No, she said gently. You haven't. He blinked. What? You haven't come to apologize. You have come because you ran out of options and someone offered you a way out. I do not know who that someone is, yet, but I know it is not you, Mike. You did not buy your own ticket. You did not write your own apology. The watch on your wrist is too expensive for the man I left in Lagos. The jacket fits you wrong because it is not yours. Someone sent you here. You can tell me who or you can lie to me, but please, Mike, do not insult me by pretending you traveled 3,000 miles because you finally understood what you did to me. Mike's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions.
Surprise.
Anger. The old, familiar urge to raise his voice. He visibly swallowed it. I made you strong, he said finally. The same words he had been rehearsing on the plane. Whatever you have become, Joanna, I made you. The man who slapped me back was not born. She was built. By me. Whatever you have, you owe to me. Joanna looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she leaned forward, just slightly, and she said, No, Mike, you did not make me strong. You only taught me what kind of man I should never kneel to again. The strength was always mine. You just spent 2 years teaching me where it was. Mike's jaw clenched. Now, she said, sitting back, tell me who sent you here, or get up and leave Seoul tonight. Those are the only 2 options I am going to give you. For 1 second, one long, dangerous second, she saw it. The flicker of fear in his eyes. The understanding of what he had walked into. The realization that the men who had bought him his ticket were not the kind of men who let a frightened messenger walk away. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He stood up, dropped a wad of cash on the table that she knew was not his, and walked out of the restaurant. He did not look back. She watched him go. Then she lifted her phone and texted one word to Junwoo. Done. 2 nights later, the trap closed. Joanna had stayed late at her office finishing a contract for a new client. The streets outside had grown quiet. She locked her office door, took the elevator down to the underground car park, and stepped out into the cold concrete dark. Junwoo's driver was supposed to be waiting in the 3rd bay. The 3rd bay was empty. She paused. Her phone was already in her hand. She thumbed Junwoo's contact. The call did not connect. No service. She turned slowly, scanning the rows of parked cars, and that was when she saw the men. 4 of them, coming out from between the columns. Not walking, closing. She did not scream. She did not run. She took 2 steps backward toward the elevator, and the elevator, when she pressed the button, did not respond. A 5th man stepped out from the stairwell behind her. A bag came down over her head. Her last thought, before the chloroform-soaked cloth pressed against her face, was clear and cold and almost amused. They have no idea what they just picked up. The next 12 hours were the worst hours of Junwoo's life. He had not been able to reach her. He had not been able to reach his driver. By the time his men found the car, abandoned in an alley 2 districts away, the driver alive but unconscious, his radio smashed, the trail was already cold. The security cameras in Joanna's parking garage had been cut. The phone signal had been jammed. Whoever had taken her had planned it for weeks. Junwoo stood in the center of the basement of his organization's headquarters, surrounded by 30 of his most senior men, and for the first time in his life, the first time in 11 years in the entire long history of the Kong name in this city, he lost control. He did not shout. He did not break anything. He simply went very, very still. Min-jae, the lieutenant who had stood beside him in the bar that first night, watched his boss go still and felt his blood actually cool inside his veins, because in 11 years he had only ever seen Junwoo go that still once before, and that time 3 men had not lived to see the morning. Boss, Min-jae said carefully, we will find her. We have eyes on every gate, every dock, every road out of the city. We will find her by morning. I do not want her by morning. Boss, I want her now. Yes, sir. And I want every man who put hands on her. Yes, sir. Alive. I want them alive. All of them. There was a silence in the basement. A different kind of silence than the silence of fear. The silence of 20 men who had just been told that their boss was, at last, going to do the thing the city had spent 11 years quietly waiting for him to do.
Yunwoo turned.
He walked to a long black case on the table at the back of the room and unlocked it for the first time in 4 years. Move, he said. They moved. What Junwoo did not know, what no one in that basement knew, was that Joanna was, at that exact moment, already 3 steps ahead of them. She had let them put the bag over her head. She had let them put her in the trunk of a car. She had let them drive her, for what she calculated was about 40 minutes, to a warehouse somewhere on the western edge of the city. Judging by the briny smell of the air and the faint, distant clanking of shipping containers. She had let them drag her up a flight of metal stairs and tie her to a chair in a cold concrete room with a single hanging bulb. She had let them do all of this because she had needed them to bring her somewhere her phone could not. Because she had needed to see their faces. Because 2 years married to a man who had taught her every form of intimidation he knew had taught her, by accident, exactly how to read men who thought they were in control. The man who pulled the bag off her head was the same man who had been in the SUV by the river that night. He smiled at her with the same unpleasant smile. Mrs. Joanna Adeyemi, he said, in careful English. Or what does he call you? I have never quite caught it. Joanna? Just Joanna? Just Joanna, she said calmly. Just Joanna. Yes. He pulled up a chair across from her and sat down on it backward, his arms folded over the back. Do you know who I am?
No.
Good. That is more comfortable for both of us. I have a small problem, just Joanna, and I think you can solve it for me. I need to know certain things about Kang Junwoo, his routines, his safe houses, the names of the men closest to him. And in return, when this is over, you will go home to Lagos where you belong, with more money than your husband ever made in his life. Joanna tilted her head slightly. My husband. My ex-husband. As you like. Was it you who flew him in? The man smiled. Was it not generous of us? Where is he now? A flicker. Just a flicker. Of something that was not quite a lie, but was not quite the truth either. Resting. Joanna looked at the man for a long moment. She was reading him. She was reading the chair he sat on, the way the bulb above swung very slightly in a draft, the way the second man by the door kept glancing at the first man for cues, the way the third man in the corner had a phone in his hand and a screen open on it that she could see very faintly was a group chat, and on that group chat, a name in Hangul that she had been quietly learning to read for 4 months. The name on the screen was a Korean word. She knew that word. She had heard Junwoo use it, late one night, with disgust in his voice. Yoon. The Yoon family.
Yunwoo's oldest enemies.
She filed it away. She smiled very slightly at the man in front of her. All right, she said. Let's talk. The man's smile widened. I am so glad you are reasonable. I am very reasonable, Joanna said. But before we talk, I need 3 things. Name them. Water. A bathroom. And to know which of the 3 of you is the one who is going to betray the other 2 before sunrise. The room went very, very still. The man across from her laughed. A startled, uneasy laugh. What did you say? You heard me. Joanna let her gaze travel slowly to the man by the door. He has been glancing at his phone every 14 seconds since I sat down. Whoever he is texting is not in this room. He is not loyal to you. I know what a man looks like when he is preparing to switch sides. I lived with one for 2 years. The man by the door went very pale. The man in front of her stopped laughing. And him, Joanna said, nodding at the third man, is watching a Yoon family chat on his phone. I can read the name. The Yoon family is who you work for, isn't it? Or who you used to work for? Because the messages he is receiving look very, very angry. The man in front of her turned, slowly, toward the third man. What is on your phone? Nothing, brother. Nothing. Show me your phone. Joanna, in the chair, watched it all unfold with the stillness of a woman who had grown up in a Lagos compound where information was the only currency that mattered, and who had spent 4 months at the side of a man who had taught her, simply by being around him, how to see the cracks in any room of armed men. The third man pulled his phone away. The first man stood up. The second man, at the door, took the smallest of steps back. And in the 7 seconds that followed, the small group of 3 that had captured Joanna split itself apart in front of her eyes, in 3 different languages, with 3 different sets of betrayals, like a piece of dry wood splitting along its own grain. The first shot was fired before Joanna had finished untying the loose knot at her left wrist that the second man, the one she had read first, had quietly slipped while no one was looking. She had read him correctly. He had been looking for a way out. She had given him one. By the time Junwoo's convoy of 11 black cars came through the warehouse's front gate 40 minutes later, the situation was already over. He kicked open the door of the cold concrete room with a gun in each hand and 20 men at his back, and he stopped dead in the doorway. 2 of Joanna's 3 captors were on the floor, alive, bound with their own belts. The third, the one who had been watching the Yoon chat, was sitting against the wall holding a bleeding shoulder, weeping quietly. The man Joanna had identified as the betrayer was standing in the corner with his hands up, looking very much like a man waiting to be told whether he had earned mercy or had merely delayed his death. In the center of the room, Joanna was standing with her arms crossed, a cut on her cheek, her hair pulled out of its braid, her eyes very clear. She looked up at Junwoo. She smiled, small, tired, real. "You took your time," she said. For 1 second Junwoo could not move. For 1 second every man behind him saw their boss, the man who had not been surprised in 11 years, the man who had walked into the Yoon compound at 24 and walked out alive, stand in a doorway with a gun in each hand and look at a woman as if he were the one who had been rescued. Then he crossed the room in 4 long strides, and he pulled her into his chest, and he held her hard enough that her bones complained, and he said, into her hair, "You will never be alone in a parking garage again." "Okay," she whispered. "I mean it. I know. I mean it, Joanna. Lagos. You said Lagos. I lost 10 years of my life when you said Lagos. I know." She held on to him. He held on to her. In the corner, the man who had been watching the Yoon chat began to weep harder. Mike was found in a hotel suite the next morning. He was alive. He had been left alive. Junwoo's men, on Junwoo's instructions, did not touch him. They stood him up. They walked him through the lobby in front of every guest at breakfast. They put him in the back of a car, and they drove him to the airport. They put him on the next plane to Lagos. They did not pay for the flight. They booked it economy, middle seat. They confiscated the watch and the jacket and the leather case in the closet, which had contained, Joanna would later learn, a small handgun and $10,000 in cash. The down payment Mike had been promised for whatever it was the Yoon family had ultimately wanted him to do. He had not done it. He had run, the moment Joanna had walked out of the restaurant, back to the hotel. He had locked the door. He had not answered the phone. He had hidden in the bathroom for 2 days, eating from the minibar, crying into a towel. When Junwoo's men had broken down the door, he had begged. They had not told him whose men they were. They had let him think it was the people who had hired him. They had let him think he was being killed. They had let him board the plane home thinking he had been spared by the Yoon family, when in fact he had been spared by his ex-wife, who had walked into Junwoo's underground basement at 5 in the morning and said, very simply, "Send him home. Penniless. Alone. But alive. Let him live the rest of his life knowing." Junwoo had stared at her for a long time. Then he had nodded. "As you wish." She had touched his face. "Mercy is power, Junwoo," she had said. "I learned that from a man at a river." He had not been able to speak for a moment. Then he had said very quietly, "I have learned more from you in 4 months than from every man I ever called teacher." 8 months later, Joanna came home to Lagos. She came home in a coat she had paid for herself, with a man at her side whose name was now spoken in Seoul with the kind of careful respect once reserved for kings, and with a project of her own, a foundation, registered in her own name, funded by her own consulting business and supplemented, at her insistence, and only after she had built the bones of it herself, by the Kong family's quieter charitable arm. The foundation had one purpose. It built shelters for women leaving violent marriages. The launch event was held in the same neighborhood where Mike had thrown her luggage onto the dust. The same compound, the same dirt road, the same generator coughing in the same corner. They had put up a small white tent. They had laid out folding chairs. They had brought in a sound system. The neighbors came. The aunts came. Mama Chinidu, who had stood at her akara stall and watched, came with her daughter and her granddaughter, and she did not meet Joanna's eyes. Joanna did not make her. Aunt Chioma came too. She stood at the back of the tent in her best wrapper, her arms folded across her chest, her face stiff with the effort of not showing what she felt. She did not approach Joanna. Joanna did not approach her. They did not need to. The whole compound saw it. The whole compound understood. Mike was there. He stood across the road, half hidden by the wall of the corner shop. Alone. His clothes were old. His shoes were cheap. His mother had not come with him. His siblings had not come with him. He had come, Joanna would later learn, simply to see if it was real, to see if she had really come home the way she had left. She had not come home the way she had left. She had come home as something the dust of that road had not seen before. She gave her speech standing on a small wooden platform, her voice clear, her hands steady. She thanked her mother, who sat in the front row in a new geli Joanna had bought her in Seoul, weeping quietly. She thanked Ada, who had flown in from Itaewon. She thanked the women in the room, the ones she knew, the ones she did not, and she said simply that the foundation existed because no woman should ever have to choose between being safe and being herself. And then, near the end of her speech, a woman stood up from the third row. She was thin. Her left wrist was wrapped in a bandage that looked too new. She held a girl of perhaps 7 by the hand. The girl had a black eye that had begun to fade to yellow. The woman did not say anything. She just stood, and she looked at Joanna, and Joanna looked back, and the whole tent went quiet. "Madam Joanna," the woman said finally, in a voice that did not carry. "Please." Joanna stepped down off the platform. She crossed the tent. She knelt in the dust in front of the woman and the little girl, and she took the woman's good hand in both of hers, and she said, "You are safe now. You hear me? You and your daughter. You are safe now." The woman began to weep. The little girl reached out very shyly and touched Joanna's face. Behind them, near the back, Mike turned away from the road and walked, slowly, into the dusk. Nobody watched him go. That evening, Joanna and Junwoo stood on the balcony of the small house her foundation had bought as its first shelter, looking out over Lagos as the sun dropped red into the haze. He had his arm around her shoulders. She had her head against his chest. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, she said, "I used to walk past the street every day. I used to think it was the whole world. It wasn't, was it?" He kissed the top of her head. "It was where the world started," he said quietly. "It was not where it ended." She turned her face up to him. "Joanna," he said, and his voice was low and rough. "I have been carrying a ring in my pocket for 6 months. I have been waiting for a moment that was big enough. I should have known. I should have known that the moment that was big enough would not be one I made. It would be one you made. Of course it would. Of course." He reached into his coat. He took out a small black box. He opened it on the balcony, in the red Lagos dusk, in front of a city that had once watched her dragged into the dirt, and he asked her, quietly, formally, in his careful, slightly accented English, to be his wife. She said yes before he had finished the question. The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been measured for it. It had been. They married therein, and after the whole ceremony they went back to Seoul together as a couple, and they lived happily ever after. Below, on the street, the woman with the bandaged wrist stood in the doorway of the new shelter and watched the two figures on the balcony. She did not know Joanna. She did not know Junwoo. She did not know any of the story behind them. She knew only that earlier that day, a black woman in a beautiful coat had knelt in the dust of a Lagos compound, taken her hand, and told her she was safe. That, for the woman in the doorway, was enough story. She turned and went inside, where her daughter was already asleep on a clean bed, in a room with a lock that worked. For the first time in a very long time, the woman slept without fear. Before I let you go, besties, I need to talk to one specific person watching this video right now. Yes, you. The one who saw yourself in Joanna. The one sitting in a house where you flinch every time the door opens. The one whose family is telling you to endure. The one whose community will whisper if you leave. The one who is afraid not of him but of what people will say. Listen to me. Take that bold step today. Pack the bag. Make the call. Sign the papers. Walk out of the door. I promise you, you will be surprised how far God will uplift you. Joanna left with one suitcase and wounded pride. And look at her now. Loved, respected, feared, free. Your story is not finished. The world that mocks you today will worship you tomorrow. But only if you are brave enough to write the next chapter. If this story spoke to you, drop a comment below, even just one word. Let me know you're here. Let me know you heard me. Hit that like button so this story reaches the next woman who needs it. Share it with your sister, your cousin, your friend, the woman at your church who has been crying in silence. And subscribe to Afrohan Tales because every single week we tell the stories of women who refuse to be broken. So that one day, that woman will be you. Until the next story, besties, be loved, be feared, be both. That is what queens are.